just for real quick to get started. Oh, never mind.
Yes. Good evening. Welcome to Matinee Free Webinar. Today we have two experts, especially in emotional intelligence, and we are speaking about positive mental health. Recognize and correct your irrational thinking. So today I am welcoming two experts, so Matt and Mr. Ray, both from USA, California. On behalf of all present here, I welcome Mr. Matt and Ray. Hi, you both are welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Definitely, yeah, we appreciate it. So Ray's in Colorado, I'm in California, USA, and we're both happy to be here. We're a little bit different time zone, but here we are in the morning. You guys are in the evening, so we make it work, right? This important information. We're excited about getting it across to people, and it helps us to get it better each time and keep working with our skills and our craft. So it helps to present it to you so that we can make it clearer and clearer. We're trying to be anyway, trying to. Some of this stuff we're taking from different people, different methodologies, different therapeutic methodologies, and modifying it so that it's really simple. We're trying to make it really practical so that you can use it, so we can use it, so everybody can use it. And this is, we're trying to boil it down. So last time we talked about how we got to be responsible for our own emotions first, our own thoughts, feelings, and emotions first. And now we're talking, Ray's going to talk in depth. I'll give you a little quick overview, but Ray's going to talk in depth about how to change our thoughts, which changes our feelings, which changes our life. So, so that's where we're at right now. I've got a couple slides here I'm going to go over real quick. And so let me share my screen. Here we go. Tell me if we got what we got it. I can see.
It's coming.
PowerPoint. Yeah, good. Okay.
Okay.
Let me make this side smaller. There we go. Okay, so we're recognizing, this is step 2, recognizing, correcting irrational thinking, right? If you want to feel better, if you want to do better, you got to watch out for your thoughts. That's where it all starts. So we got to watch our thoughts. So the way this works real basically is we're working on emotional intelligence, which is understanding what's going on inside of us, understanding our own and other people's feelings and emotions, something we don't usually talk about, something we don't learn about in schools, something we better not talk about at work, right? But we got to know about how this stuff works. Then now what we're trying to develop is positive mental health, which is, what do I do with it? Okay, so now I understand how it works. What do I do? What do I do with this? So there's strategies and practical applications for putting emotional intelligence to work in our lives. That's we're trying to make it as practical as possible. And the point of all of this is peace. The point is to get toward peace, interpersonal peace between us, social peace among us, and someday big peace. So that's the point of where we're going. We start with emotional intelligence and positive psychology. We're studying about our emotions, the concepts and language and the research and the science of how our emotions work inside of each of us. Very important stuff that we don't usually learn in school. And we're trying, our nonprofit EQ for Peace is trying to get emotional education into schools everywhere. So usually our thoughts come first. I say usually because like physical pain can come before your thoughts. Then your cognitive thoughts happen, and then your feelings, in that order usually. Our yucky feelings come from our yucky thoughts. But I've read research both ways, that your thoughts come first and that your feelings come first. I believe your thoughts come first. That's my personal opinion, because I've read research both ways. But the practicality of it is that if I think my thoughts come first, then I can change them, and then that changes everything. And so that puts me more in control of my life. So with positive mental health, what we're trying to do is base it on positive psychology and its skills, its behaviors, its competencies is what do I do with this, right? Of putting our thoughts and our feelings and our emotions and our decisions and our actions to work for ourselves to make our lives look and more importantly to feel as great as we want them to. So positive mental health, we're spinning it positive. Positive mental health refers to the state of psychological and emotional well-being in which individuals are able to function optimally, cope with normal stress of life, and contribute positively to their community, involving the ability to think, feel, and act in ways that promote happiness, resilience, and a sense of purpose in the meaning of life, of our lives. This was written by Farah Sarash, who runs Nurture Life. She was in a workshop with us, me and Ray, a week or so ago on World Social Work Day, and she came up with this definition. I really like it, so I'm stealing it. This is basically, it's about learning how to deal with our negatives. So if we have yucky thoughts, like Grace called it, irrational thinking, if we're having yucky thoughts, then we're going to have yucky feelings, but we can change those. We can change those. We can deal with the negative part and we can change them. If we don't change them, our yucky thoughts can turn into some really yucky actions like violence and abuse and addictions and suicide and divorce and mental health issues. Now we're finding even physical health issues, crime, war, all that stuff is based on yucky thoughts. It's pretty wild that it kind of boils down to one basic thing. And so that's why we're jumping up and down about it. And we believe that, well, actually we're kind of sitting here, but you know what I mean? That most people don't know that. Most people don't know that their thoughts come first, and they don't know that they can change them, if they don't like them. So that's why this is very important to us. In my opinion, the lack of emotional intelligence is the #1 biggest problem in the world today. We're born with everything we need, but we don't know how to use it. We don't know how to use it. So emotional education, which is what we're doing right now, and positive mental health are the solution. So it's an education problem. It's something that we can just learn and do better. We can just learn it and do better. We have everything we need. We just need some tools to make it do it better. This is the most practical subject there is in both of our opinion. It is 24/7, 365. We have thoughts, we have feelings all the time, and we can, so it can change everything if we can take control of these things. If we're not, you're in trouble. You're in trouble. Basically, 3 steps are awareness first. We got to be aware first, or else we can't do anything. Acceptance, I'll talk more about that in a minute. And action, what do we do? What do we do? So we accept that we're having thoughts and feelings, and then what do we do with them, if anything? We can do nothing with them, which is fine, but we need to know that our awareness, our thoughts and our feelings, and our acceptance of those or non-acceptance of those comes first. Then we act or not act, and it puts us in control of our lives. One of the main things that Ray's really good at, especially, is you got thoughts that don't work. Think something different. Think something different. He has some great graphs on this and how to step through changing them. Change your thoughts, change your feelings, change your life, in that order. We can't unthink. It's kind of weird because we don't actually change our thoughts. We can't unthink something. If you thought something, you thought it. It's in the past. You already thought it. It's too late. You already thought it. But what we can do is, once we notice awareness and acceptance that we are having a yucky thought, we can change it. We can think something else on top of it. So awareness is, I call it name it to tame it. So oh, look, I just had this thought and I don't like it. I'm having this thought, I don't like it, right? We can practice mindfulness and notice and become more aware of our thoughts. Then acceptance is about emotional responsibility. We talked about this last Saturday. That's step 1 of positive mental health. Step 1 is having emotional responsibility. They're my thoughts, they're my feelings, what Ray calls an internal locus of control. They're mine. You didn't make me think that. You didn't make me feel that. I did. And that puts you in control of you. That puts you in charge of your own life. That's a very big deal. No one makes me think anything. I do that. And then once I'm aware and I accept responsibility for it, then I can do something different. I call it spin it to win it. Change it. Change my thoughts, change everything. If I don't like what I'm thinking or what I just thought, I can change it. I can make a new thought to replace or override the thought I had. For example, someone steps on my toe, right? Somebody stepped on my toe. If I think, hey, they did that on purpose, I'm going to have physical pain, which you don't, it's not optional in my opinion. But second, we're going to get angry, disrespected. We feel disappointed. We're like, wait a minute, what the heck, right? And we're going to get all fired up. If, however, if I go, whoops, that was an accident. If I think that instead, I'll still feel the physical pain, but I can also feel probably understanding, calm, more peaceful, because I'm not all fired up that someone did something to me, right? So it depends on my thought or my feeling. Here's another example. Someone is walking away from me. I'm sitting here and somebody's walking away from me. There she goes, walking in that direction. She's just walking. I just notice that somebody's walking away from you. No big deal, calm, peaceful, and understanding again, right? Or what if I think she's leaving me? She's leaving me. Okay, now that changes everything. That's a different thought. Now I feel sad. I feel hurt. I feel rejected. I feel maybe pain, emotional pain, angry, disappointed, lonely. All those stuff comes from this different thought because I'm thinking that she's leaving me as opposed to she just walking away, right? That's a thought. So it makes a lot of difference. It makes a lot of difference what we think. So if I change my thoughts over time, my thoughts can improve. With practice, I can make myself think better and more positive, more loving thoughts, more peaceful thoughts, more connected thoughts, and then I'll feel better and have more positive feelings. I'll have make more positive decisions and take more positive actions, right? So if I change my thoughts, it changes everything. And we don't learn about this stuff in school. Aristotle said educating the mind without educating the heart is no education at all. I think that's a little severe, but you get the idea. We don't learn this stuff in school, and that's wrong. That's why we're here getting talking about it. We got both sides of our brain, where our intellectual thoughts and then our emotional feelings, and usually our left brain comes first. What we're trying to do is balance the two, balance our cognition with our emotion. We have three, this is from 6 Seconds, the biggest EQ trainer in the world, this graphic. They say, think, feel, act, TFA, think, feel, act, in that order. And if you change one, you change them all, but they come in this order. I'm saying there's another step in there that's super important, is your decision. Think, feel, decide to act or decide not to act. And that is where we have ton of control. What actually and what that means is that no matter what happens outside of us, we get to have control of what happens inside of us, and that's what we're talking about today. What's going on inside of us? All right. Ray's worked with Albert Ellis, and they did. You'll see. Well, he'll explain their steps. The way I've worked with Doc Downing, PhD. He's for 20-something years. Ray works with rational, emotive, right, which is cognitive, affective, we call it. Rational, emotive is your cognitive, your thoughts and your feelings. We call it cognitive, affective. Same thing, same idea, tiny bit different in wording. This is a worksheet that I made on Doc's work, and it's the event happens, stuff happens. We have a thought about it. We then have a feeling about it, and then we behave based on our thoughts and our feelings. So it came up with this worksheet, and you can go across and do the negative part of that, and then go down the bottom, and you can change it. If you change your thoughts, then that changes your feelings, which probably will change your behavior. So it makes a pretty cool worksheet. This thing can change your life. This is an example. This is me, and this is kind of give you an idea. You can go across the top, and they're not happy stuff. You go across the bottom. If you change your meaning, then you can change everything. It changes everything. So it all starts with our thoughts. As the greatest, William James said, the greatest discovery of our generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. As we think, so shall we be. So it's our thoughts. All this stuff happens underneath our success and our results in life. So we got to know what's going on inside of us. Again, our goal is peace. Our goal is peace inside and around us. So if we say feelings matter, that more than we ever imagined, make them more important. We give ourselves permission to feel. We take responsibility. This was step one. Take most responsibility is step one. Step two, manage your thoughts. You're always at choice about what you think. So choose wisely and choose love and peace. and then pass this on, please pass it on as you go. So, all right, real quick overview. I'm going to stop sharing now, and we're going to switch over to Ray, and he's going to tell you how Albert Ellis and Ray Mathis say it. Go, Ray.
Okay, here we go. Okay. And from the beginning. Okay, so it's positive mental health, step 2, which is recognizing and correcting irrational thinking. Now, step 1 was developing an internal locus of control. And I'm going to give you a little review of that. It's based on a formula for how life unfolds, which is event plus thoughts equals feelings and behavior. Some key points from that, part 1 of the key points: anything others say or do or that happens is just an event in our lives. Events can be real time, they can be remembered or imagined. But the important point from that formula is that thoughts are really what cause feelings, not the events, even though most people believe it's the events. And another key point, there's always more than one way to think about or look at anything. Therefore, it's our choice how we want to look at or think about what happens. And whatever way, we call this unconditional self-acceptance, which means our default philosophy is always whatever way we choose to think about or look at things is part of being human and will be understandable given our life experiences. However, since thoughts cause feelings, not events, it's our choice how we want to feel. No one upsets us, we upset ourselves. Now, second part, there's actually 3 parts to developing an internal locus of control. The second part is recognizing what you do and don't have control over and working with what you do. And some of the key points there is we can't control what others think, feel, say, and do. A lot of people act like they can and think they can, but you really can't. If you've ever been a teacher, you'll find that out real fast. We only control what we think, feel, say, and do. And the more we try to control what others think, feel, say, or do, the more we find to get upset about, and the more out of control our lives will feel. The more we focus on and control what we think, feel, say, and do, and that's a big job for most people, the more in control we can feel. And the third part of developing internal locus of control is to not take unnecessary responsibility for how others make themselves feel. So we're responsible for what we say and do, but not necessarily for how others make themselves feel about it. They can upset themselves as much or as little as they want to. What we say and do is just an event for them. So therefore, it's their choice how they want to feel. No one upsets them, they upset themselves. Okay. Now, the key point is that people too often generate what I call a dysfunctional amount of emotion. By that, I mean more than is necessarily helpful, more than they want to have, more than they know what to do with, and a type and amount that works against them instead of for them as emotion is intended to. Now, emotion, one of the basics here is that emotion is energy to move. That's why I like to hyphenate it. The purpose of it is to help us deal with perceived threats and to help us get what we want and need. Now, the real underlying problem is that people too often perceive threats where they don't or need not exist. And they often magnify ones that might exist out of proportion to reality. Now, one of the ways they do it is by wrongly seeing what others say and do and what happens as the cause of how they feel. That's one of the ways they needlessly manufacture threats, because you blame the other person for how you feel, therefore they become a threat. Now, 2 ways people magnify threats we're going to talk about today: by what they choose to expect of others, themselves, and life. There's a quote in here where Shakespeare said, "Expectation is the root of all heartache." Now, the other thing is by how they choose to look at what they don't like that happens in their life. Now, I like to define the word irrational. To me, irrational means thinking in a way that causes you to generate more emotion than is necessary or helpful, and to behave in ways, thinking in ways that cause you to behave in ways that make your life and perhaps the lives of others worse instead of better. Now, Dr. Albert Ellis came up, identified and named 4 basic types of irrational thinking. He called them demandingness, awfulizing, can't stand it-itis, and labeling damning. I'm going to go through each one of these. Now, we'll start with demandingness. But in order to do that, I'm going to use a visual I developed called a think, feel, do thermostat model. Now, the whole idea of that is a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I think this is a great visual. It helps people see where you are emotionally and behavioral at any given moment. It helps you see the cognitive reasons or thought reasons you're there. And it also helps you see where you might want to be instead, emotionally and behavioral. And it helps you see what it will take cognitively or as far as your thinking to get there. Now, I got the idea from staying in hotel rooms that had a thermostat with a little lever that you could move up and down to lower, raise or lower to set the room temperature. Now, we have objective ways to measure the amount of heat or energy in the air, for example, degrees Fahrenheit or degrees Celsius. Now, but we also have subjective terms like hot, warm, and cool to describe what the air feels like to us. Now, and we further qualify those terms with words like sort of or really, like it's sort of hot or it's really hot or it's sort of warm or it's really warm. Now, this is the way I constructed the feel thermostat. Okay, you can be calm or you could have concern, frustration, irritation, annoyance, sadness, regret, or remorse. Or if you turn it up more, then you end up with anxiety, anger, depression, shame, and guilt. And that's how we construct the feel thermostat. And these are qualitatively and quantitatively different emotions. And it'll become a little clearer why as we go through the thought part of this. Now, whenever we look at emotions, we always look at the frequency, intensity, and duration. When somebody has an anger problem, for example, it means they're generating a greater frequency, intensity, or duration of anger that is helpful or necessary. Now, so we can say that someone has a low frequency, intensity, and duration of annoyance, frustration, irritation, or high, and a low frequency, intensity, and duration of anger, or a high frequency, intensity, and duration. Now, one of my life rules I use to construct the do thermostat is that there's two ways to make a situation you don't like worse: do nothing and overreact. And people too often do the latter, but that's part of how I built the do thermostat. I also like to hyphenate the word responsible, because what it really means is able to respond in the best possible way instead of reacting or overreacting. So this is the way I constructed the do thermostat. You can do nothing, you could respond in the best possible way, or you could react or overreact. Now, remember that emotion is energy to move. So the more emotion or energy to move we generate, the more reactive and less response able we become. So if we're calm, we might do nothing because we're not motivated to do anything. There's no threat. If we have concern, frustration, irritation, or annoyance, we have energy to move. We're motivated to act, but we're still relatively free to respond in the best possible way, to consider consequences, to take advice into consideration, and so forth. But once we get up there into anxiety and anger, we tend to react or overact. And anxiety and anger are two parts of our fight or flight response. Now, emotions like depression, shame, and guilt, they seem hard to think of as energy to move, because when people get depressed and feel ashamed, they tend to seem to have little energy. But they have the same effect on behavior. They make people more reactive and less responsible. For example, if you're sad or have regret, remorse, you're still free to respond, which might include talking to others, seeking help, or problem solving. But once you get into depression, shame, or guilt, people tend to become more reactive, and they react to life in ways like getting drunk, using drugs, or even possibly suicide. Excuse me. Now we're going to build the think thermostat. There are three basic ways you can think about or look at anything. Okay. You could think not care about it, and you could just sort of not care about it, or you could really not care about it. And then you could want, prefer, and desire it, and just sort of want, prefer, and desire, or really want, prefer, and desire it. And then you could think you need it, it's a necessity, and demand it, and either sort of do that, or really think you need it, really think it's a necessity, and really demand it. Now, I have 5 rules I teach. Rule number 1 is you have a right to want whatever you want. Now, according to Dr. Ellis, the cognitive mistakes, or what I call missteps that people make, are the following. They start to think they need things they simply want. They start to treat their simple preferences as necessities, and they start to demand what they simply desire. Now, the reason that's important is rule number 2. And rule number 2 is the greater the difference between your expectations and reality, the greater the perceived threat will be, and the more emotion or energy to move you'll generate. If or when you don't get what you want or need, or lose it, or simply imagine doing either, as an anxiety is a figment of imagination. It's a future tense emotion. Now, this is the quote I mentioned earlier from William Shakespeare. It's very true. Expectation is the root of all heartache. Now, remember that emotion is energy to move, to help us deal with threats and help us get what we want and need. So if you don't care about something, there's no perceived threat if you don't get it or lose it. But if you want, prefer, and desire that, then there will be some perceived threat if you lose it, don't get it, lose it, or you simply imagine doing either in the case of anxiety, and you might generate some concern, frustration, irritation, and annoyance. But if you think you need it and it's a necessity and demand it, then the perceived threat is much larger, and you'll generate anxiety and anger and plug into the flight or fight response. Now, and then what effect that has on behavior is, if you perceive a minor threat and you have frustration, irritation, annoyance, or concern, you're still free to respond. But if you think you need it, it's a necessity, and demand it, and then don't get it or lose it or imagine doing either, now you've got a much greater perceived threat. You're more likely to generate anger or anxiety and react or overreact. Now, if there was a real threat to life and limb, then generating a lot of energy to move makes sense and could even be life-threatening. Okay, there's an old saying, he who hesitates is lost. So that could cost you your life if you hesitate. On the other hand, too many times people overreact and generate a lot of needless emotion. Okay, and the problem is they treat their perception as reality. There's an old saying, perception is reality. Well, perception is not always reality. People just think theirs is. Okay. Now, people can even equate their simple wants, preference, and desires to air, water, and food in their own minds. And that makes not getting what they want, prefer, or desire, or losing it, excuse me, seem like suffocating, dying of thirst or hunger, which would be the maximum threat, extreme threats. Okay. Now, the cognitive missteps or mistakes that Dr. Ellis identified are the root cause of so much needless emotion, conflict, suffering, even illness and death. I call them the least common denominators to all the things that human beings struggle with. Now, rule number 3 is about the effect these cognitive missteps have on behavior. When people start to think they need things they simply want, prefer, and desire, it can make otherwise smart people do stupid things. And it's a very simple way to explain this. If you were suffocating, what would you be willing to do to get air? And of course, the answer is everything, anything, okay? So if you started thinking you need someone's love, acceptance, and approval in the same way you need air, water, and food, what would you be willing to do to get it or keep from losing it? And the answer, unfortunately, is the same, anything. And that's what can make otherwise smart people do stupid things in relationships. Now, rule number 4 is another example of how it affects behavior. This is from Dr. Ellis. Behavior intended to satisfy a perceived need will tend to win out, or sometimes say trump, I hate to use the word Trump now, over behavior intended to satisfy a rational preference. And the best way to explain this is to give you an example. If someone says, I want to quit smoking, that's a rational preference for a whole bunch of reasons. And the behavior that would satisfy it is to stop smoking. If someone says, I need a cigarette, I can't go all day without one, that's a perceived need, because you don't need a cigarette. People think they do, but they don't. Okay, so the behavior to satisfy that would be smoking. Well, my question for you is, a person has both these thoughts, what are the odds the person will quit? And obviously it's very unlikely. Now, you can make demands of others, yourself, or life, and which you make demand of will often determine the feeling. For example, anger typically, but not always, excuse me, comes from making demands of others. It can also come from making demands of yourself in life. Anxiety tends to come from making demands of self or life before a life event. Okay. And shame and guilt tends to come from making demands of self after a life event. Depression tends to come from making demands of life. Now, when people make demands, they tend to use verbs like need or need to, have to, can't, should, or shouldn't, as opposed to using verbs like want, like, rather, prefer, wish, or appreciate, which would be desires, expressing desires. Yeah, I'll show you how this works for stress and pressure, which is something people struggle with a lot. Those are really anxiety, okay? And anxiety is a figment of imagination, which means it's about things that could happen, but haven't happened yet, and often never do. The important point, though, is that stress and pressure comes from inside us, not outside us, from the way we choose to look at an upcoming life event. They come from what we choose to expect of ourself or life before an event. Now, if you want to accomplish or do something, there's always a possibility that you won't. And that would represent a threat. Excuse me. How big of a threat will depend on how badly you want to do it. Now, so that's what that might look like if you graphed it. So if you want to do something, there'll be a certain possible threat that you won't be able to, and you'll have concern and a certain amount of stress. But what people do is they needlessly stress them out and put undue pressure on themselves by choosing to think they have to accomplish or do something. That makes not accomplishing or doing it a much bigger perceived threat. So they turn their think thermostat up to have to instead of want to. The perceived threat gets much bigger in possibly not accomplishing that. And they'll generate anxiety and feel a lot more stressed than they did otherwise. Now, there's a formula for anxiety. It's catastrophize plus awfulize equals anxiety. First, you imagine something you consider bad happening, but then you tell yourself it would be awful if it did happen. If you said, so what, who cares, there wouldn't be anxiety. What causes the anxiety is the awfulizing, what we call awfulizing. So by setting their think thermostat at have to, you're more likely to imagine something bad happening, and you're more likely to think it would be awful if that did happen. Now, the ultimate demand people make of themselves is I have to be perfect and do everything perfectly all the time. Or demand of life would be everything has to go exactly as I planned or wanted to. Now, so what happens, sometimes people can get into a vicious cycle of generating anxiety before an event and shame and guilt afterwards. Because what they tend to do after things don't go well, and very often anxiety will impair performance, because if you plug into your flight response, you're so busy trying to have this urge to flee the scene or the situation, that does impair your performance. It's hard to concentrate. It's hard to perform at the level you're capable of. So you're more likely to have your performance impaired and to not accomplish what you would like to. So then you're more likely to do what we call should on yourself after. Well, I should have done this, I should have been, and so on, and generate shame or guilt, which in turn can make you more likely to think you have to do something the next time. So you can get in this vicious cycle. Now, so that brings us talking about shoulding on yourself, which is a form of making demands. And you can also should on others and life. For example, depression. If you listen to the way people think when they get depressed, they very often are saying things like, this shouldn't or can't be happening to me, or I shouldn't have to deal with this, or it shouldn't be so hard, it should be easier, instead of saying things like, I wish this wasn't happening to me, which would more likely cause them to feel sadness rather than depression, which is much stronger. I wish I didn't have to deal with this. I wish it wasn't so hard. I wish it was easier. Now, demands can also come in the form of a question. For example, how dare they, or how dare you talk to me like that? Or how could you act like that? Okay, which means basically when you say how dare you, you're basically saying you absolutely can't or shouldn't have done what you did. Now, some of the factors that encourage demanding this, well, one, modern life does that, because life is more convenient, comfortable, and pleasant than ever before, and we get too much on demand, which spoils us. We all know that if we give a little kid everything they want, whenever they want it, they tend to become spoiled. They become very demanding. Well, the same thing is happening to adults everywhere in the world, because in general, life is much more convenient, comfortable, and pleasurable. And we're all, even like when we watch TV, they always talk about on demand, HBO, on demand. So everything's on demand. Advertising does that too. They can encourage you to think you need things you simply might like to have and might be nice to have. Deprivation can do that, where suddenly you're without things. And one of the things that's happening in the world because of the wealth inequity, people who have very little see people with very much, and that creates this sense of deprivation, which can contribute to demandingness. And in the US, perhaps this is happening in other countries too, we have a lot of political pundits who are encouraging people to be demanding. And the demand is everything and everyone has to be the way I want them to be. And that's why there's so much needless anger in America and perhaps in other countries as well. Now, one way to explain why there are more mental health problems, even though life is much better today than ever before, now obviously not for everyone in the same way, and more political and ideological division, is that people are becoming more demanding. Now, the second type of thinking is called awfulizing. And there are a lot of things in life that are unpleasant, inconvenient, or uncomfortable to some degree. The mistake people make is start telling themselves and believing what's happening to me or what might happen is awful, as in the worst possible thing that could be happening at the moment. Now, my grandfather used to call this, you say you're making a mountain out of a molehill, which is kind of what awfulizing does. You're magnifying the importance and the awfulness of something that's happening. Now, and when you do that, what that does is magnifies the threat. And you're more likely then to generate anger, anxiety, and some of those other feelings. Now, factors that encourage awfulizing, well, we have 24/7 news coverage in most countries around the world. I know we do in the United States. And basically, they're all competing to have the best news stories. So that they tend to sensationalize what's happening. And then that makes everything awful. And sometimes the reporters will say, it's really awful, it's really horrible. Okay. And the other thing is the increase in demandingness. If you demand things, then you're more likely to think things are awful if or when you don't get those things. In grievance politics, we have a lot of that in the United States, where politicians are basically agreeing with people. Yeah, what you're thinking is it really is awful. I agree with you. It really is awful. That's basically what grievance politics is. Now, can't standarditis is the third type of thinking. And rule number 5 is you have to have the right to like or dislike whatever you want to. Now, the mistake people make is to turn their think thermostat up from I don't like it to telling themselves I can't stand it. Now, if you really truly couldn't stand something, you would die or go crazy. Okay, so they're basically exaggerating the perceived threat. Now, this needlessly inflames people, and it's why Dr. Ellis called this type of thinking, I can't stand it, itis, because itis is the suffix for inflammation. Now, so by turning the thermostat up from I don't like it to I can't stand it, they magnify the threat out of proportionality, and they're more likely to be angry instead of frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, more likely to have anxiety instead of concern. Now, there's a special emotional state Dr. Ellis called LFT, or low frustration tolerance. And it sounds like this: I can't stand doing things that are hard. I can't stand doing things I don't like to do. Can't stand doing things that are boring. I can't stand doing things that take a long time. I can't stand doing things that aren't fun. Now, this tends to stem from demands. And the demands are things like, it shouldn't be so hard. It should be easier than it is. I shouldn't have to do things I don't like. It shouldn't take so much time. Learning, this is one of my favorite ones I used to hear all the time from students, learning should be fun. And unfortunately, we've taught kids that. Now, factors encouraging LFT, modern life has become increasingly more comfortable, convenient, pleasant, and stimulating, okay? And people develop a tolerance for comfort, convenience, pleasantness, and stimulation the same way they do for alcohol and drugs, which means it takes more comfort, convenience, pleasure, and stimulation to give them the same satisfaction a lesser amount did before. That means they have a growing intolerance for discomfort, for inconvenience, for unpleasantness, and everyday life, which can be quite mundane sometimes. Now, Dr. Ellis used to call low frustration tolerance, well, I can't say one of those words. He liked to swear a lot, but he called it whining, and he used to add a modifier on the beginning of that. Now, so by turning your thermostat up to need, necessity, and demand, that predisposes you to look at things as being awful instead of unpleasant, inconvenient, uncomfortable, and to thinking that you can't stand something instead of simply don't like it. And that all magnifies the threat out of proportion to reality. Now, label and damning is the final type of thinking, and you can dislike the behavior of someone else or yourself. That's rule number 5. You have a right to dislike whatever you want to. The mistake people make is they turn their thermostat up to label and damn the person. Now, label and damning is basically, you can label and damn others or yourself. It's what Dr. Ellis called blatant overgeneralization. I like to refer to the apple metaphor. It's like calling an apple bad simply because it has a little bruise, even though the vast majority of apple is still fine. It's condemning the doer instead of the deed. Okay. Now, if you dislike their behavior, well, then you'd be frustrated, irritated, or annoyed. But if you label and damn them, then you become angry. If you dislike your own behavior, you might have regret or remorse. But if you label and damn yourself, then you end up with shame and guilt. Now, it's kind of this chicken or egg thing, because I can see people getting angry and then being more prone to label and damn others. But I also can see people who are labeling, damning others. That can be part of what makes them angry. So which causes which, it's hard to see sometimes. Now, racism, xenophobia, and bigotry are all the product of overgeneralizations. For example, they are examples of labeling and damning and product of blatant overgeneralization. I think I have an extra slide in there. Now, for example, this is what it might sound like if you put it into words. That bunch has some bad apples, therefore the whole bunch is bad. That's an overgeneralization. That person is part of that bunch, so he or she must be a bad apple, which is a second generalization. And that's basically what racism, xenophobia, and bigotry is. Now, so let's talk about how to dispute all this and how to challenge, and Dr. Ellis called it disputing. He has an A, B, C, D, E step approach to life, and D is called disputing, which means challenging and questioning and correcting irrational thinking. Now, first way to approach it is this. Every thought we have or comment we make is really our personal theory or hypothesis about the way others, we, and life are or should be. Now, so the question then becomes, does the evidence of life, everyday life, or your own life, support our theories or hypotheses, or does it refute them? Does it suggest alternative or better theories and hypotheses? Now, Dr. Ellis, if you watch old clips of him, you'll often hear him say to clients, where's your evidence? Where's the evidence that someone has to do what you want them to? And so forth. He did that all the time. Now, so the more your theories and hypotheses diverge from reality, the more you'll find to be upset about and the poorer mental health you'll experience. Now, think about it. Mental illness is people diverge from reality. Okay. Now, the closer your theories and hypotheses match reality, the less emotions you'll generate needlessly and the better mental health you enjoy. Now, for example, if you say, excuse me, you can have a choice of saying to someone, you can say whatever you want to, or you can't say that about me. Well, the reality is others can say whatever they want to. So the bottom statement, you can say whatever you want, matches reality. It's a better theory or hypothesis. Whereas when you say you can't say that about me, well, the evidence is right there in front of you. People are saying things about you that you don't like. So that's not a very good theory. Remember that the bigger the difference between expectations and realities, that determines the amount of threat you're going to perceive. So the reality is others can think, feel, say, and do whatever they want to. So when you say they can say, you can say whatever you want to about me, that matches reality. When you say, I don't want you saying that about me, well, that's a little bit different than reality because they are saying it. So there's going to be some threat and some emotion. But when you say they can't, you can't say that about me, the difference is much, much greater. Okay, so this is what it would look like. So there's very little threat if you say you can say whatever you want to. You say, I don't want you saying that about me. There's a certain amount of threat. You'd be frustrated, irritated, annoyed. But if you say you can't say that about me, now the threat becomes really big because they are saying things and you're more likely to get angry. Now, the second way to approach this is to ask a simple question, is that a fact or an opinion? Okay. When people upset themselves more than is necessary or helpful, it's typically because they're thinking in terms of opinions rather than facts. The more you think in terms of facts, the less emotion you'll generate needlessly and the better mental health you enjoy. For example, go back to our original example. The fact is others can think, feel, say, and do whatever they want to. So when you say you can say whatever you want to about me, that's a fact. Okay, it matches reality. Now, if you say, I don't want you saying that about me, well, that is also a fact because I really don't want people saying that about me. But when you say you can't say that about me, that's an opinion because people can say things about you. Okay, so again, that determines the amount of threat that you get perceived. When you're saying you can't say that about me, it magnifies the threat on proportional reality. And that's why you're more likely to get angry instead of simply frustrated, irritated, or annoyed, or perhaps staying calm because you think you can say whatever you want to. Now, another technique that can be used in disputing or challenging irrational thinking is called active listening, where you act like a mirror. And basically, you reflect back to someone what you hear them saying. You put what they seem to be saying into precise words. And sometimes simply doing this helps them see the obvious irrationality of what they're thinking or saying. For example, if I were to say, so you're saying everyone and everything has to be the way you want them to be. Now, sometimes me just saying that and putting it into words is enough to make someone realize it's kind of a silly statement, okay? Now, but that demand, everything and everyone has to be the way I want them to be, is the essential demand of people when they get angry. That's basically what they're saying. Well, one of the ways to challenge and dispute that, a very simple way, is say, how old does that sound? And see, the problem is it sounds like a 2 or 3-year-old throwing a tantrum. And that's why Dr. Ellis used to say anger is an adult throwing a temper tantrum. Now, as far as demands in the form of questions, when you say things like, how dare you, how could you, the answer we teach people, unfortunately, the answer is easily. How could you talk to me like that? Easily. Doesn't take a lot of energy or effort. How could you be, how dare you treat me like that? Easily. Doesn't take a lot of effort or energy on someone's part. And one of the advice I always gave students is never ask a question for which you won't like the answer. Okay, and they teach lawyers that too. Never ask a question in a courtroom for which you won't like the answer. Well, don't ask questions like, how dare you, how could you, because you're not going to like the answer. The answer is easily. Now, as far as shoulding, sometimes people, this is a way to combat that. People will say you're shoulding on yourself. Just letting someone know that they're doing that. And they'll say, well, what does that mean? What do you mean shoulding on myself? It means you're using the word should and shouldn't a lot and making demands of yourself. Or you could do what Dr. Ellis, if you look at old film clips of Dr. Ellis, you'll hear him saying a lot to patients, stop shoulding on yourself, okay? And sometimes people wear shirts. I've seen people wear shirts that say, I'm not going to should on myself today. Excuse me. And another way to combat that, I used to always tell my students as a way to combat or dispute shoulding is say shoulding on yourself or others in life just makes you feel shouldy. Okay, kind of a play on words. Now, the other way to challenge or correct irrational thinking is to pose some simple and direct questions. For example, if you were to say, I need that. Well, I might say, why do you need that? You need air, water, and food. You'll die in minutes, days, or weeks without them. Are you going to die if you don't get that thing you think you need? Do you need that, or would it just be nice to have? Do you need that, or just want it? And it's okay to want it. You have a right to want whatever you want. But do you need that, or just want that? And hopefully they come to realize the real answers, the only correct answers are, I don't need that like I need air, water, and food, because I'm not going to die if I don't get it. I don't need that, I just want it, which is okay to want it. I don't need that, it would just be nice to have. Now, so what the goal is not to get someone to not care about something, it's just to get them to turn their think thermostat down a notch to there. because that's their right as human being to want things. The mistake they made was to go up to need. So we just get them to turn it down a notch. That's all the goal is. Now, here's the key point as I go through the rest of this as well. You can set your think thermostat wherever you want to. I'm not going to tell somebody where to set their think thermostat. That's their choice. But there will be predictable emotional and behavioral consequences for where you do set your thermostat. Okay. Now, so if you're making demands of others, for example, they have to do what I tell them to, or they should. Why do they have to? They have to, or you just want them to. And hopefully you come to realize the only correct answers are they don't have to. They don't have to, I just want them to. And that's my right as a human being. They don't have to do anything, and neither do I. Now, there's a technique called affirm the preference. So what it basically means, if I were talking to you, I might say, look, you have the right to want whatever you want. That's rule number one. But why do they have to do what you want? They have to, or you just want them to. So that's called affirming. First, you say it's okay to want what you want, but you made the mistake of thinking you need it and other people have to do so. So again, we're just trying to get them to turn it down a notch, because that's everyone's right to want whatever they want. Now, if you're doing that to yourself, I have to. Why do you have to? You have to, or just want to? And of course, the answers again are the same. I don't have to. I don't have to. I just want to. I don't have to do anything. Now, if you use the verb can't or should, make a demand that says they can't talk to me like that. Why can't they? They can't, or you just don't want them to. And the only correct answers are they can, because they do it all the time. They can, I just don't want them to. They can do whatever they want to. Okay, so you're just turning it down again a notch. That's all you're doing. Now, and do the same thing with yourself. I can't. Well, why can't you? You can't, or just don't want to. And the only answers are I can, I just don't want to. I can do whatever I want to or put my mind to. Now, with practice and rehearsal, these questions become automatic. And the best way I can describe the way they work is they act in analogous fashion to grammar check on a computer. When I type something that's grammatically incorrect on a computer, it automatically says, nope, that's not right. It underlines it, highlights it. Well, that's what happens in your brain if you practice these questions enough. It becomes automatic, acts just like grammar check. Now, you'll become what we call unconsciously competent, which means you correct your rational thinking automatically. Now, one of the other techniques that Dr. Ellis used to talk about for dealing with demands is called putting your behavior, or in this case, your verbal behavior, where you want your attitude to be. It simply means practice talking the way you want to think. And the way we do that is to use I messages instead of you messages, because you messages tend to be orders and demands. Okay, like shut up, sit down, do what I tell you, or threats, criticism, put downs, or name calling. I messages simply start with I. They simply give people information like what you don't like or what you want or don't want. They leave it to the other person what they want to do about it. So they're not demanding. Okay, use verbs like want, like, rather, prefer, wish, or appreciate. Now, here's basically what happens. So you originally set your thermostat at demand, which what makes you angry, and then you use you messages when you're being when you're in that state of mind and angry. Well, then you're going to start using I messages like I want you, or I'd like you, or I appreciate it, I'd rather you didn't do that. And what that eventually happens is it leads to you eventually turning your thermostat down to desire instead of demand. Now, why I think it's important to talk about why change is hard and what it takes, because we're talking about making changes. When we practice irrational thoughts or comments, we develop ruts in our brains. Ruts make irrational thoughts or comments automatic. And once we create these ruts, we can't get rid of them. We can only make new ones and hope they compete with our old ones for use. But we can always slip into old ruts, and probably will. We always have those irrational thoughts stored in our brain somewhere. We can always slip into those old ways of thinking. Now, so you will slip into old ruts and you'll become unconsciously incompetent. But with this practice, you can quickly recognize the irrationality and quickly change the irrational thought and plug into new ways of thinking. So you can quickly move up this scale. Now, let's talk about awfulizing, how to challenge that. Well, some very, very simple questions. Is it awful or just unpleasant? Is it awful or just inconvenient? Is it awful or just uncomfortable? And hopefully you get people to learn to realize that the answer is it's not awful. It's not the worst possible thing that could happen. It's just unpleasant, it's inconvenient or uncomfortable. Okay. Now, another strategy I use with my grandkids, and you could use with yourself, big deal or little deal? When Rosie, my little granddaughter Rosie, starts to get upset, I said, big deal or little deal? And she'll say, little deal, Grandpa. And then she calms down immediately because she stops awfulizing. Okay. Now, you can also practice coping statements. For example, I grew up with grandparents who always told me they went through the World War II, Korean War, and Depression. And they said, hey, it could always be a lot worse. And I always think of that. When my wife says something's really bad, I said, hey, it could be a lot worse. It could be your brother who's dying of cancer. Okay, it's not the end of the world. It's not that big a deal. It's over and done with. I tell my wife that all the time. It's over and done with. It's water. We used to say it's all water under the bridge. And the other rule I live by is if you can't make it better, at least don't make it worse. I was a paramedic and we had to live by the first do no harm rule. If you can't make it better, at least don't make it worse. Okay. Now, there's a rule that I was taught too, I think is very important to remember. When someone is awfulizing, the last thing they need is someone agreeing with them. And that's what grievance politics, for example, in the United States, that's exactly what they do. They agree with people who are awfulizing. You're right, it is awful that somebody does that. Okay, and that's why we have so many people needlessly being angry and so much political and ideological division in the country. So what we're trying to do is not get you to not care about something. We're just trying to get you to turn it down a notch. That's all. Now, even when you call something a problem, that's a form of awfulizing. You're elevating the perceived threat there by saying that's a problem. Because why not choose to see it as a challenge or opportunity? And I got this from our dean of students, who was a counselor also. And people ask him, how do you deal with these kids? Because he says, I don't look at it as a problem. I look at it as a challenge to get them to do what we want them to do, or an opportunity to prove I'm as good as I think I am. So that's the way I've always looked at things too. It's a challenge or opportunity. Now, as far as can't stand it-itis, how do you correct that? Well, I can't stand it. Why can't you stand it? You can't stand it or just don't like it. Are you going to die or go crazy just because of that? And hopefully they realize the answers are, I can stand it. I can stand it. I just don't like it. I'm not going to die and I'm not going to go crazy just because of that. Okay. You can also, again, affirm the preference here. You can say, look, you have the right to dislike whatever you want to. That's rule number 5. But why can't you stand it? You can't stand it or just don't like it. That's called affirming the preference. Now, you can also practice some coping statements. A very common one is, what doesn't kill me makes me stronger. I'll survive no matter what. Others can take it, so can I. And I've survived worse than this. Those are some coping statements. So what you're trying to do again is get someone to turn their thermostat down a notch, just to simply, I don't like it. Okay, I can stand it, I just don't like it. And I also think it's important to challenge. Boredom is a very important modern day problem. And teachers have to deal with this all the time because kids say, I'm bored. This is boring. And that's a form of LFT, or low frustration tolerance. One of the ways I've always challenged boredom is beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Well, so is boredom. Okay, it depends on how you choose to look at things. The other way is to challenge it is this. I use my formula, event plus thoughts equal feeling. What others say or do or what happens is just an event. It's how you choose to look at what others say or do or what happens that causes boredom or excitement. Others in life don't bore you. You bore yourself. And the evidence of that is very simple. Some people will find some things boring. For example, my daughter thinks me going out and taking pictures of natural landscapes is boring. Well, I think sitting in front of a computer playing the games they do is boring. So it depends on how you choose to look at things. Boredom comes from inside you, not outside. Now, there's another thing you hear a lot nowadays from kids, especially. This is no fun. This isn't fun. Well, my way of responding to that is, if you can have fun while you're working, wonderful. Okay. Work can be interesting, challenging, and rewarding, but that's why we call it work, because sometimes it's not fun. Okay, it's work. There's a reason we call it work. Okay. Now, as far as label and damning, the simple questions you can pose to challenge label and damning are, why are they stupid just because they did that? Just because of that one thing. So it's like saying, well, they got a bruise, but why does that make them a bad apple? They're stupid or just did a stupid thing. They're stupid or just did something you don't like. And it's okay to not like what they did, but why does that make them stupid in every way? And hopefully the answers you come to realize are, the only correct answers are, they're not stupid just because of that, because a lot of smart people do stupid things. They're not stupid, they just did a stupid thing. They're not stupid, they just did something I didn't like. And you do the same thing with yourself. Why are you stupid just because of that? Or why are you stupid or just did a stupid thing? You're stupid or just did something you didn't like. And hopefully the answers you realize are the same. Now, so that basically is the end of step 2 on how you correct irrational thinking. And just to review here, step 1 of positive mental health is to develop an internal locus of control. And the key points from there is that events plus thoughts equals feelings. Thoughts cause feelings, not events. So therefore, it's your choice how you want to feel. No one upsets you, upsets yourself. The only person you control is you. Don't try to control other people because you can't. And no one upsets other people, they upset themselves. So don't take unnecessary responsibility for how other people make themselves feel. Now, positive mental health, step 2 was recognizing, correcting irrational thinking. And we had 4 types of thinking that Dr. Ellis identified, named demandingness, awfulizing, can't standarditis, and label and damning. And the ways to correct those are multiple. One is to treat it as a theory or hypothesis about the way people, life, and you are or should be, and then ask, where's the evidence? Where's the evidence? Does it support your theory and hypothesis, or does it refute it? Or simply asking, is that a fact or an opinion? Okay. If you make demands of others like, how dare you or how could you, the answer, unfortunately, is easily. And we could also tell you, as far as shitting on yourself or shitting on others in life, stop shitting on yourself, stop shitting on others in life. It just makes you feel shitty. Now, you can also practice posing simple, direct questions. I went through a whole list of them for each type of thinking. Now, and you can also practice and rehearse coping statements. I gave you a whole list of those. And you can practice talking the way you want to think. Put your verbal behavior where you want your attitude to be. And that's a way to combat demandingness, to start using I messages, where you simply express your want, preference, or desire rather than making a demand. Now, positive mental health, step 3, which we'll talk about next weekend, is Dr. Ellis's 5-step approach to turning troubling life events into growth opportunities. Okay, and he has a very simple 5-step process, and I'll explain that next week. And basically, the reason that's important is because in REBT, we're all about teaching a process rather than simply giving advice. There's an old saying that giving advice is stupid because fools won't use it and wise men already know it. And there's another old saying, give a man to fish and he eats for a day, teach a man to fish and he eats for a lifetime. In REBT, we're very much about teaching someone to fish so they eat for a lifetime, teaching them to manage their emotions, giving them a process. And that's what I'm going to give you next weekend. And that concludes my presentation. Okay, get out of this. Okay, all done.
Okay, thank you very much. Today, in our steps 2, we have explained so much things, especially about active listening, copying statements, the effectiveness of copying statements, then how to manage boredom. Then there is a special responsible, the meaning responsible, and similarly for emotion, it is energy in motion. Then formula for anxiety, then shooting, awfuling, and based on rule 5, like and dislike, the effectiveness, and things thermostat, and LFT, there is low frustration tolerance, and so many other things, really wonderful. So how to manage such things, it's very clearly explained. Thank you, Mr. Ray and Mr. Matt. Thank you for explaining for the step number 2, irrational thinking. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Doctor, can I say something? You know, I do the PowerPoint in a narrative form because as you go through this PowerPoint, I have to go fast because we only have so much time. But no one's, even if it makes total sense when you're hearing it, it's not going to be something that's going to stick with you unless you go back and look at it over and over again. You might have to watch this and slow it down and stop at each slide and think about each slide. That's why I put it in that form, so someone can go back and even without the sound, they could just read through it, or they could have my voice and they can stop it or start it as they need to. It's going to take more than one run through to get this. And you're going to have
Okay,
to
definitely,
practice.
that's true. We can understand what is there in the PPT and what you are told. Exactly. Thank you. Thank you very much. We have any comments, please? Shaji sir, George, Shaji sir, please.
Yes, only if we take it again slide by slide and think over it, then only we will be able to get more out of it. But the problem when from the discussion, certain things are stupid and certain things are defined beautiful, but that is in the eye of the beholder. But what all nowadays, what is stupid and what is beauty, it may have different interpretations, and boredom depends on the on our feeling level. So we upset ourselves because of the response or behavior of other people. Shooting is very much there because so many things are demanded from so many levels at different times, different situations, different people. So shooting is there at different levels. Anyway, wonderful presentation. Thank you, sirs, both of you.
There's a lot there, so I put a lot in a very short time. It's years of training and education. And I urge you to go back and go through it very slowly at your own pace and try to think about how each thing, each point applies to your personal life. That's one of the best ways to get it to stick, is to make it applicable to your personal life.
Okay, okay, clear, sir.
Okay, then Raju sir, can you hear? Yeah. Yeah. Raju sir, can you?
I'm very seldom attending these sessions for the positive mental health. Actually, I think it is a wonderful topic. We should attend continuously because we are going very, very fast and we are not able to catch it properly, especially because I am not attending all the classes. You are telling about the words of James, this great American philosopher, William James. The greatest lesson I learned, the greatest invention of this my century is that my generation is that a human being can change his life by changing his attitude. That's the biggest thing. And about the controlling the negative emotions, emotional health, positive mental health. We have to control the negative emotions. For that, Mr. Matt and they are suggesting many practical solutions. If you are following this solution, if you're following these instructions, surely we will be able to lead a better mental health, better life. I just like to appreciate, congratulate both of you for giving me such a wonderful presentation. I hope I can attend this series more regularly so that I can understand. Anyhow, I thank
Thanks,
for
appreciate it.
conducting these sessions. I hope I will be able to attend more and understand more. Back to Sabusa.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much. So, anybody is there to do? Rahanan sir, are you here? Yes, please.
Really wonderful class, sir. It's a continuation of PHM. In today, what you have totally told, I understood that change your thought, change your attitude, change your planning. So with the EQ, that's all. That is enough. And again, our goal of life is peaceful life. You told, forget the past, live in the present. Enough. Thank you, sir. That's much. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So once again, thank you, Lehanan sir. Then anybody is there to talk something regarding this topic? Anyway, we are waiting for the third topic also, step 3, on next Saturday also. I hope it is there. Is it, Matt?
Right,
Yes.
yep, next Saturday. Mhm.
So in a
I
Saturday,
think we have
yes, yes.
step 3. We did step 1 today, 2 today. We'll do 3 next time. It's all very
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
practical. Try to.
Yes, yes. Sure, sure. Thank you. So once again, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation on irrational thinking. There's something which is which we can't block. It pop up
Yep.
just like it comes like
Yep.
wind. It comes like waves. It's coming and coming. And in mindfulness, we say that it just come and let it go. Let it go like. Anyway, we have a little more care on our irrational thoughts. Definitely. So we'll meet in the next week. And tomorrow we have a book review. So it's a wonderful book. You are a placebo. And okay, thank you once again, Mr. Matt and Mr. Ray. Have a nice day today, and coming week also. And we'll meet the next Saturday, the same time, same day. Till okay, thank you.
Good night, sirs. Good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Live long and prosper.
Speaking of irrational thinking, we're going to get a new puppy today. So that's kind of irrational. It's doesn't make much sense,
Yeah.
but it feels good, but it feels good. So
Give you something
we'll
to
see how that
do.
goes.
Give you
Yeah.
something to do.
Yeah, boredom is
You
not
are-
one of my big complaints.
Racer
Matt-
looks younger. Racer
Yeah.
looks younger.
Yes, yes.
Take care, bye, guys.
Okay, bye. See you. And definitely, Matt, also please take care. You have some cough last week also there.
Yeah,
Trying to
hopefully it'll be
Take care.
fine.
hanging on too long.
7 to 10 days for viruses, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. And
Mm.
have a nice
Message is
day.
EQ for peace.org. This emotional
yeah.
coefficient for peace. This is the meaning.
Yes.
Emotional coefficient. Yes, emotional coefficient is very important. We are discussing about very great topic and it's a problem of this.
So actually, Raju sir, they are working for last 35 years. Especially Matt, they are doing so much service for emotional intelligence. On the background, EQ for Peace is an organization, international organization, and we have some institutions in India also.
Yes. This is.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you. Bye. See you.
Bye.